it will keep the light. So it will be always this balance between this abstract order and the movement of the people. And that will last and will come again and again in every project. Concerning our personal obsessions, we can say that we have just one idea, and we have developed the whole work we have been doing during these 18 or 20 years with this idea. This idea, which is related maybe with the starting point of doing architecture, which was related with the death of Franco and the coming of the democracy in Spain. It's about equality and difference. So this idea, which was called like a human sympathy, in the sense that we recognize ourselves like belonging to a group, and in this sense we can establish a relationship with the others as an equality, but at the same time we feel like being absolutely different one to another. And this is something which is social, which is maybe political, but it can be considered for us as something very, very architectonic. So we will work with this idea of equality and difference. So we will transform this idea of personal obsessions and equality and difference through this, what we call expressive systems. Just to make a small examples. This is our first work, which was a museum in Zamora. The important thing, it was this fifth facade, this was the roof, with equal top lights that become different in the interior of the space according to the orientation or to the height of the space that was behind. So in a way, it's, we can call that like a family, for instance, a family of highlights. No? This is the facade of the Leon Auditorium. I will go very quickly to that, just to express that idea, in which we can recognize also this family of windows, like being at the same time, well, you have a orthodox order here, after dividing 6, 7, 8, 9 parts. So in the exterior, they appears to belong to the same group, and in the interior there is a second order and a Sardos order that express this idea of communicating through architecture this value, this important value of being or feeling like equal and different. And that this is a model for a section in another museum in Castellón, in which, well, there were 4 different plans and a double height space in each one of these plans makes every plan absolutely different, exaggerating, even it has the same square meters, well, even the same nails or screws in each one of them. So a family of skylights, a family of windows, a family of double heights. According to that, it will be possible to establish an order between all the projects we have done or the competitions, which are related to this idea of equality and difference. Some of them, they are related with geometry. Some of them, they were related with geometrical expressive systems. Some of them, when working in the landscape or not in the city, it will be related with this idea or flowers or circles, as Sarah was with this nice description. This is the town hall of Lalín, in which every circle recognized to other circles, like beginning to the same geometry, but at the same time being different through the size. So this idea, which is very simple, it's very interesting for us to check that after 18 years, it can be drawn or thought in a different way. In this case, in the case of the MUSAC, this is the plan of the foundations, and as you can see, it's done just with a square and a rhombus, a trapezoid, a rhombus here, with an extremely rigid plan, but every part of it will become different according to the light or the construction of the way you arrive to. And this is an interesting point of view for us, in the sense that, well, there will be courtyards, there will be windows, there will be top lightings, there will be different lights that will make something which is extremely rigid. It will become absolutely different through light, which is the most cheap construction material we know. This idea of equality, of difference, I will take a few minutes in the lobby of the museum. The lobby of the museum is the only one that is made with 2 squares and 2 rhombus, so the size is something like 22 by 22 meters. So we wanted to keep this distorted geometry, so there is a beam at an angle in the interior. So this beam, the structural effort that suffers a beam like this, which is an angle, it's very big, well, it's higher, of course, than a normal one. So that means that this building, which is just 1 floor, there will be the beam coming up. It will be higher than the rooms and the names of the museum. So we decided that it will be interesting to do the same that we were doing in other parts. It's to create a top light. The incredible thing for us is that when we decide to do that, there appear 2 top lights here. And well, the beam is between all of them. So in the morning, well, this photograph is not very clear, but in the morning there will be a bright and yellow light coming down here, and a blue, not that solid light coming in that way. And this is one of the best things of architecture, when something happens that it was absolutely unexpected. So we were working with this idea of equality and difference, and just going through a process of solving a technical problem of a structure, it appears this double highlight, which is, in our opinion, the best representation of equality and difference that we have done in our life. But that was beyond our imagination. It was something that was produced just going ahead with the rules we were working with. So, and well, later in the afternoon or in the evening, they interchange their lights, well, like being a man or a woman or a couple, which they take different roles in every moment of the day. We will move to a second landscape, that the personal one, it was, let's say, our obsession, something that it will last and it will be present in every project, well, at least by the moment, who knows what will happen after some years, which is, and maybe this is also an exaggerated word, which will be the problem of what are the concerns of the architects. So maybe it will be exaggerated to say, let's go to an intellectual landscape. But it's true that we have this feeling that during, well, at least maybe 20 years or maybe more, architects have been concerned about this idea of what is exactly the role of the architect as a person, defining the form of the buildings. And it appears to us that at a certain moment, architects start being helped, or at least just being helped by things that doesn't belong exactly, let's say, to the architecture itself, but that belong to other fields, and that can, well, justify or define simply the form of the things. If we think, for example, the works with about scaling, the works about using computers, the idea of defining the form of a building just with the norms that happens in the city, the idea of making the plans of the buildings with the flux or the speed of the cars that are going close to a building. So there is this temptation of trying to justify the form through something that doesn't belong internally to the problem of the architecture. So that was we were concerned about this idea of how to deal with this problem of establishing the form of a building. Well, we start working with this idea of a non-hierarchical plan, instead of working with something that has a center and can be related to this center. We start working with this idea of just putting together squares and rhombus. It was that happened during the process of trying to explore how the project will be, or how will be the way of doing this project. It happens that at certain moments we notice that when you are working with this non-hierarchical position, at a certain moment the form of the building, the overall form of the building, become absolutely indifferent. So there are several models here in which we were dealing with the angles. Not every angle is possible. You have to keep the expression of the building, but at the same time make it possible, let's say, to exhibiting the works of art. But during the process of doing models and models and models, we noticed that it was not that important, the overall form of the building. And as it happens during the process of the project, and as it happens during the process of the construction of the project, some pieces can be added if needed. If you want to enlarge the part of the exhibition part, you can just add a square or a rhombus. And if the storage surface is too big, you can just take out part of it. The remembering of the building, or the idea of the building, it will be absolutely the same, no? And that is something that we were very impressed. We can, as we made during the process, you can just add parts here or put out parts there. And the idea of the building, it will be always the same. So from a certain point of view, this non-hierarchical way of defining the form has the advantage that becomes the overall form becomes not a problem, but just the solution of what problems you have to solve. And that was very interesting for us in the sense that everything can be done. So the problem of the form, it doesn't become something a priori, but it becomes just like a consequence that can be moved or changed without making alterations in the philosophy or in the understanding of the project. We will move to another space, which is the construction space, which is another landscape. The client asked us about having a quick construction. So one of the problems, it was to make a prefabricated beams. Well, you can see. You can hear that. Well, maybe you didn't notice, but when working with the squares or rhombus, the length or the span of the beams are always the same. So the building is done with 656, I think, beams that are exactly equal. Well, there are interesting problems, but I don't know if we spend months with that, because it's true that this length is always the same, but the distance, if you wanted to keep the distance between the beams as being the same, then probably a kind of continuity in the building, then there will be less beams here than there. Well, and that means that not every angle is possible. And it's very interesting or very nice when you discover that you are entering in a world in which some parts of it, they are already decided, but you keep being absolutely free or having infinite possibilities for doing that. So we apply, in this case of the structure, this idea that we call the restriction, which means that, well, I don't know if you remember, there is a book from a French writer, let's call it correct. Well, in French it was called La Disparición. In Spanish it was called El Secuestro. Well, the interesting thing is that you start reading the book. I don't know if you have read the book, but you start reading the book, and after 100 pages or 20 pages or 40 pages, well, the title would be in English, they kidnapped. You realize that there is a letter that has been kidnapped. So the whole book in French is right without the E, which is the most common letter, and in Spanish is right without A, which is the common letter. So it takes like, I think it was like 12 years, the translation. I don't know if that's were translated to. But what is the interesting idea? The interesting idea is the more restrictions you put on something, it appears another kind of creativity, because let's say that the history has to go to a different parts according to new words that has no the E or has no the A. Well, just a quick glance about to see the construction of the building, which is this plan in which the walls, it was like a stair, it was built like a stair. The beams that has the same length that appear. Well, this is just for me to have time to to have water. Sorry. Then this way we will go to another territory or landscape, which is the relation to the city, but in historic terms. And maybe it will be a little bit more clear what I was speaking before about this need of being a transformation. It is not exactly true that the overall form can be whatever, no? Because in a way, architecture is like a promise. It's like a will. You are promising something. But what is true is that there will be this is the museum, and this is the new part of León. And there were just these buildings with personality and parking areas. So we decided to create a new piazza here in order for this part of the city to have a meeting point, which is facing west and facing south. So except for that there was a will of creating a void space, the overall form can be described in whatever form. So we were working with this building, which has these colors. The history of these colors, it's incredible. Maybe sometimes the history of the things there has like a small letter. At the very beginning, the client wants to have a video wall, a huge video wall in this part of the building. When we told the client that the cost of the video wall, it was exactly the same as the building, they decided not to put the video wall. But, well, there are some colors that last here, no? We made some colors and that's it. Well, after working for months and months and months, it was impossible for us to decide, or to make an approach to this color. And we are not artists, we don't have education in color terms. So we went to the client and said, oh, this minister would have thought that maybe the building it would be very nice or white, you can imagine. And then he said something very nice. He said, well, you promised me colors, and you have to give me colors. Then Emilio and me, 330 kilometers back to Madrid, thinking about how to deal with that. Because we tried to make it so, like during 2 months, sometimes it was too modern, sometimes it was too old-fashioned, sometimes it was too red, too green. It was impossible. So we were, some days later, we were having a visit with a friend to the Cathedral of Leon, which is the city where the museum is located. So a friend of ours said, oh, what nice colors. So I look at Emilio look at me, and said, we have it. So we went back to the office, and we took the most ancient stained glass window, took a small piece which is called the Alconero, and we make a digitalization of this. And that was incredible. That was incredible. I don't know if you can imagine the pleasure of doing something without doing it. No? Because at a certain moment it appears and everybody, what do you think about it? Oh, I like it. I like it. No more. No, this is too modern. This is not. No, it's nothing. I mean, so the idea is we took some part of the history of the city, which was the public meeting space, and through the means of our time, we transformed it and we put it in the building. Well, that's a little bit the idea. Well, the incredible thing is that how strong is the will of something, because there are some people from Leon that say, oh, I see the Alconero, I see the bird. No, which is impossible. No? 40 kilometers far, no? You see, but it's a will. They wanted to see the bird, and they can see the bird. And the second consequence that we were trying to convince the client that was very nice, but because it's incredible, the result of that is, well, we never, being Spanish people, we never use the flag, for instance, no? or putting this red with this yellow. And the incredible thing is that somehow when it's erased the will of the sign totally, then the building starts not belonging to the one that has the sign, that start belonging to the people that is looking at it. Because it appears to be like when you go outside and you look at trees, you will never see, oh, you will never say, oh, this tree is too big, oh, this tree is too small. Oh. It will be something that free up space for the others. And in a certain sense permits us to take a distance with the process of the projection. We can make also this we can trace this movement with the plan of the building. When we started the plan of the building, there was this idea of equality of difference that was growing somehow. There was this idea about non-hierarchical spaces that were growing somewhere in the office. And there was also this idea of taking Leon, it means lion apparently, but the name came from, that was a military camp of the Roman army, which was called Legio Septima. So from Legio came the name of Leon. So we made the same, we stole something from the history, which is a Roman pavement, which is kept in the museum of the city, and we make a process of scaling it. So it's somehow the same process. We just take this pavement, wrong pavement, which is it's very interesting because you can cut it in half parts and then become orthogonal, always with piece and just half piece. But at the same time, it gives this kind of movement or dynamism to the plan. But the idea is that we are establishing a non-formal relationship with the context, but through a movement which is more, let's say, it's more like our time or like our years. We are making a scaling and producing the geometrical framework from a plan. I put it here because we noticed that there were like French fries, this building, like the MUSAC. Well, what is the interesting thing? The interesting thing is that when you go to the museum, you will never notice that this is done with squares and rhombus, because this is something that has disappeared somehow with the presence of the themes, or the presence of the continuity of the names. So the extreme rigidity that appears to be in the framework of the geometry somehow disappears when you are working or walking through this project. So this space, it will be almost impossible to recognize. And this is very interesting, and it has a lot to do with this first idea of the colors, because we will say that there are two important tasks as an architect. The first one is to have an idea, and the second one, which is actually the difficult one, is to make that idea invisible. Well, invisible, but the one that wants actually to go inside the problem and want to discover how it's done and want to study or to make an exploration on it will understand. But let's say for the people that it's going there and is just enjoying the spaces, there is just this idea of equality and difference that it's coming directly into the brain, not even through the eyes, but directly into the brain through the different layers of communication that you have established. Well, there's this different views of the galleries of the museum. When it's possible, the color enters, and that will be, but that is the shop actually, and some pieces where they are not done for exhibition purposes, the light can enter. Well, we will go displaced to another landscape, which is, we'll say the social aspect or the artistic aspect of the building. No? So the question is how modern or contemporary art should be exhibited there, and beyond that, the important thing is what will be the relation between the people that gets close to the contemporary art. So like being a triangle, this is not a relationship person-art, but in our opinion, it's not just a personal thing, but it's also a collective thing. So this idea, it was a kind of evolution. When we made our first museum 12 years ago, it was a chronological axis. There was like a high point of view. There was an order of the importance of the things according to the value. Well, there was a way of seeing things. It was not better or it was not worse. But in this case, the idea of the client and also our idea, and I think that was the important thing about the MUSAC, that there was a complete and constant dialogue. It was very, very enriching about how to deal with this space. Well, we will work with this model in which the space, they are more related like a kind of a stage in a way. to say something that has the possibility of being transformed in every moment according to the necessities. No? We like very much this photograph because this randomness of the colors is like the randomness of the colors of the people. No? So in a way, well, this is a work of art. The opening, Vivo sin trabajar, which is I like without working. It's difficult to do that. And then the space, it was a very traditional part of Spain. You have to notice that this is the most unpopulated area of all Europe. So you can see the traditional prisman looking at the paintings that they are just put in the floor. But there is another way of thinking, so that there is a work of art in which you have to cross through it. That was a work from Thomas Hirschhorn, the last Balkany wars. So he kept some pieces of each of these 7 wars that was in Europe, and then you were going through it. Well, there was works from Marina Abramovic, a small MUSAC. That was a Peruvian artist that said, well, we don't have money in Peru for doing a MUSAC. I will make a micro MUSAC with a square and a rhombus, and we will give it to, well, these problems of gender, these people of risk. But, well, the important thing is how you can say the spaces change according, that was the house of Sana, the Castilla Sejima and Nishizawa. That was 1:2 scale. That was very nice, the museum, which is, well, the light is entering. The work of Elmgreen and Rack said that there was these 6 houses in which each one of 8 has a personal experience of the couple. Well, it can be absolutely darkened, or, well, it can be the exteriors. There will be this, in this piazza, there will be these concerts. Well, this is, well, for the little friends. But the interesting thing is that at the end it's a non-hierarchical space in which you cannot make a distinction between what is a corridor, what is a space for exhibition, what is a space for storage. And you just move, organizing through the courtyards with the interior, one exhibition, 2 exhibitions, 3 exhibitions, connected or not. And you can work like having a stage in which a theater representation will take place. We'll move right now to the last space, which we call nature, because well, I have to make clear that when you have to prepare a lecture and then you have a PowerPoint, you establish a linear discourse. But as you can imagine, those things that I have been talking didn't happen in that order. We try to imagine this circle, try to go counterclockwise to avoid this kind of linearity, but well, at the end the linearities. And I'm saying that because if we ask ourselves actually where it starts, the MUSAC, what was the first idea that we start growing in some parts of the building? We were building during those years the auditorium and the Museum of Zamora. It was in the same road to the north of Spain. So we spent 8 years every Wednesday doing 300 kilometers, 300 kilometers back. And during that, this is a very unpopulated area. You can imagine these incredible huge fields, maybe 1 hour without seeing nobody. And it was incredible to see these flower fields. And then you realize, you say, well, it's incredible. It's incredible because when there is a very strict order inside something, the perimeter, it doesn't matter. And then you will see these flower fields, one here, another there, one is big, one is small. So and then Emilio and me were asking always in the car, well, it would be possible to make architecture like that. It would be possible to have such an order in the interior, such a natural order in the interior of something strong enough to make unnecessary the definition of the form. And that happened also when we were walking and we were looking at the birds. No? Sometimes you are traveling, no? You see a group of birds, and it doesn't matter, no? You recognize that it's a group of birds, and it doesn't matter which birds they are, how many birds they are. They are big or not. They are always a kind of order, no? There are like 3 laws: the distance, the speed, according to the wind, whatever. So, and we ask the same question. It will be possible to make a little bit like that, in which you recognize that there are relationships between things, and that the size or the form become independent, because we are always saying, well, this is a flock of birds. This is a flock of birds. It doesn't matter if it's big, if it's small, if it's which kind of birds. So at the end, we start putting all these things together that were growing in different parts of the office. The idea also of a mathematical field. So the idea that this square, he knows that there is 4 rhombus here, but he doesn't care about what is there. He doesn't care about this there, because there is no hierarchy on it. And this idea of preserving, having not a hierarchy, it was something with start putting together all this, the idea of equality and difference, the idea of establishing a relationship with the history of the city, the idea of dealing with the problem of the form, the idea of building something which can be done prefabricated, the idea of having the remembering of these plowed fields. Well, there are some views here of the roof. This is, well, there are some more here. That's during the construction. But here you can see something which is also very interesting, because not that day, but some days after, we were explaining to the minister the project. Well, Mr. Minister, good morning, good morning. Here's the project. Well, it's a wonderful museum, you know, this is the rhombus, the square, the Roman pavement, that is the entrance. And then the minister said, oh, I love that project. It's wonderful. But what it is? Look at Emilio. Well, you know, this is the entrance. There are the colors. This is the rhombus. Incredible, wonderful. I love it. We're going to do it. But what it is? I'm sorry, Minister, but I don't know what you mean. Yes. I mean that there are some buildings that are like birds. There are some buildings that are like mountains, and when a journalist asks me what I'm going to answer, Emilio and me 330 kilometers back to Madrid without opening the mouth. No? But at a certain moment, we recognize, or we remember that this area, which is called Castilla y León, it's an area which is defined by a river, which is Rio Duero, that crosses all this part. No? So it's defined, the territory of the land of that is defined by this river. So the river has like 7 regions. So we say, well, Emilio, we have to do it. Let's go to see the minister. Well, dear minister, you know, this is like the Rio, like the river Duero. No? There are seven regions that you have here in your autonomy, in your commitment. And you know, well, the art is like the water, which is always the same and always different. Like, what? Perfect. Let's go to see the journalist. And it's incredible because after, I don't know, 6 or 7 years, every time you see in the newspapers the museum MUSAC, which is like the river. But this is an interesting question because we have to think a little bit about it. No? First reflection is it's not possible to work just with metaphors. I mean, if we decide at the very beginning, well, let's do a building which is like a river, it would be possible. You are like exposed, no? You can have the freedom of dealing with the project and changing things and trying to incorporate the unexpected. But at the same time, we have to ask somehow, we have to ask as an architect something, why is so difficult to transmit the values of the things through the media or through the names, no? Why is it so necessary sometimes to have like a keyword, something that opens the knowledge or the will of the people, no? That happens also with the colors when someone say, oh, I can see the bird, no? It's a bit of strengthening. So first reflection, it's well, it's not possible to work with metaphors as a way of building or building a project, I mean. And the second thing, well, we have to make a reflection about how can we transmit the values we think the architecture has to the people. So we have done this round counterclockwise, through the personal, through the ambitions we have that maybe will last, the intellectual or the concerns that architects have, that it will be obviously different for everyone, geometrical, historical, artistic, social, nature. But the important thing, as I was saying before, in our opinion, what architecture is done with these landscapes are more landscapes. All of them are equally important. And in order to introduce them into the project, a transformation has to be done. And this is interesting because you go to a process in which you change constantly objects, ideas. You establish an idea, and to make it possible to be transformed, you have to go through a model, for instance. In this model, it will appear some value that has lost something, that has something new. So this way, when you arrive to the end of the project, the idea and the construction of the idea has become the same. You cannot just expect, well, I have a good idea for architecture, let's think about how to build it. No. You have to go moving constantly from objects to ideas, from construction to structure to history, in order to make it in every time more close the aspects of the building. And well, we are just we're close to the end, but we would like to finish with the beginning of the museum. The beginning of the museum, the opening, it was very, very interesting. It was a lesson for us because, well, I know that normally here in the United States, when you say that you are finishing a building, let's say in April, you will finish in April. But this is not normal at all in Spain. So the problem is that the director thought that it would be a delay of 2 or 3 months. But we finished the project in April. And that was a huge problem for the director because he has the museum and has no exhibition. So they are very clever people, so they decide, well, let's do something. So they decided to make a first exhibition that it was called, well, the first exhibition is done by you. So they invite all the kids of the city, and then so every kid make a drawing with the promise of the director of the museum that he will keep the drawings, so you can imagine, no? Every kid goes to the museum because their parents say, oh, you know, my kid has a drawing in the museum. So there were like I think it was like 10,000 kids that go to the museum. So they are very, very intelligent, very intelligent because it was a very cheap exhibition, as you can imagine. But the interesting thing is that, well, there were two aspects. The first aspect is that people see the building. This is not important. People understand that was a building that want to be based in participation. That's the important thing. So, with no money almost, it was very cheap, just the pictures. All the city came with its kids to see the space and to participate somehow in the space. No? They're very clever, so they produce a catalog, and then you can imagine that they sell all the catalogs to the parents. Well, it was a very nice experience, very, very intelligent experience. You can see all the drawings here. This is very nice, el MUSAC. No? That was made by Eduardo Zeta, el Zorro, el MUSAC. With the door, very nice, we love it. So this idea of taking somehow distance from the process of defining things, well, with the help of means. I mean, it is not something hard. You have to provoke it. You have to think in the project as a base which is able to receive things, and be transformed. No? Well, and this is the last photograph. So something unexpected happens. Is that before the construction of the MUSAC, the people in the wedding day, they used to go to the cathedral to make the photograph. Do you remember the bird? Yeah. But we don't know exactly why. They decide to move to this space. And then it has become a tradition. I think, well, in the end it is the same, no? The colors are the same. The interesting thing is there is a friend of us that sent this photograph to say, well, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but this is what is happening, no? Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing because it means that these colors, they are not anymore, let's say, our colors. They are the colors of the people. It's like being photographed with a tree or with a mountain. There is no possibility of recognizing the will or the intention of the sign which is behind that, except of the remembering that it's part of the whole history of the city. So that became such a big tradition that the director of the museum is preparing a new exhibition. He's recovering all the photographs of all the marriages in the city, that there are like 600 or 700, and they will make a nice exhibition with all the photographs of these people with theater. And I guess they will produce a catalog and they will send it to me. Thank you very much.
Take questions, please.
Sí.
Will you answer questions?
Yes, and one. If there is some question. Yes, please. I don't know if I will carry it.
If the idea and the construction of the idea are the same,
Sorry?
if, as you said just a few minutes ago, the idea and the construction of that idea are the same, then is it dishonest to explain that idea with an artificial metaphor?
I think there are different things. I think I was trying to explain in the more honest way how we go through a process of doing architecture, in the sense that you are taking different things and you are trying to put them together through transformations. But sometimes for this political person or for some other people, they need to establish a relationship with something that they don't understand. So the question is, why do we need to establish a literary level between architecture and the people that it's living in? So I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I'm not answering you, sorry. No, in the sense that we have to think about that. So if you have an ideological idea, if you were working with an ideological idea, then you can transmit this ideological idea, and then everything, it will be the expression of that. But if you are trying not to be as a priori in ideological terms, and you think or suspect that every project has its own personality, that it will grow as a mix of something which is rational and hazardous, but which is trying always to connecting, because sometimes you need to do this explanation.
There is, I mean, just following a bit with that question, and it's perhaps less than a question, it's perhaps less a question than a commentary, but there is, within your work, a consistency of erasing the idea of iconicity as a single figure that ideologically has been displayed and portrayed by the institution or by the architect, and perhaps it's trying to construct perhaps a phenomenological icon, that is the icon that is being constructed through the resonance of the subject walking through your buildings. And perhaps, I mean, that went in a very subtle manner, right? And that started from your desires as architects of starting from like the fall of the dictatorship in Spain and understanding that architecture has a larger role than become a dictator, that the architecture should become a democratic event. And I think that's quite of an important element, even more nowadays when architecture actually looks into icons, right, and tries to construct these figures that represent certain things, and try to go back and to say, well, there are phenomenological icons, right, or there are experiential icons. And I don't know if you have been thinking of finding a word, right, not again as branding the concept, but as extending the concept as a pedagogical one, that architects should not be creating icons, should be able to create these kind of participatory moments of resonation, of moments of resonance, right? When we try to establish metaphors, there are resonances that have been established. But the resonances that you create are resonances that go much more deep into the soul, right? And I think it would be great if you would be able to find a word and to make a book, right, that is able to transmit that in a way that even if it might be ideological within itself, it might be able to erase some of the inherent thought of constructing icons as images. So it was just a commentary. I think it was, thanks for the lecture.
I think that's a huge task. I don't know if I'm strong enough. No.
I was really interested in your, I really liked the circular diagram that you were presenting, and I was interested in how your office begins and maybe ends of projects. It seemed like to me that this diagram wasn't exactly, it wasn't a linear timeline because it's not exactly how your office or your projects, they don't work in a linear fashion. How do you begin and how do you then create that diagram within your office, within your project?
Yes, we were speaking a little. I think that it was this phrase that Sarah was speaking before about being elephants, in the sense of having a kind of resistance, strength that you need to go through the process of architecture, and planting flowers. So the idea is that you start a project with different ideas. Because that was not the only idea to do the MUSAC. There were different ideas. And then it grows these ideas in different parts of the office and related with another idea. So we're saying, well, we plant some ideas and then we keep watering them and looking at them in winter time and in summertime, and some of them decay and some of them resist. I mean, decay or resist, for instance, well, this is a good idea, but we are not able to produce it in a consistency, with a consistency structural system. So this idea, it will be for other projects, you know? And then you arrive to a point in which you are being able to more or less go to this process in which the consistency, it's arriving to a very simple form, in this case. I would say that, well, in relationship with the question, no? I was thinking, for instance, this idea of the colors of the MUSAC, for us, it was not important at all. In fact, we wanted to make it white. But because we thought that from the architectural point of view, it was more interesting the non-hierarchical plan, the idea of flexibility. But, well, you know, when the photographs, let's say, in the newspapers prefers colors. So it becomes like the representation of the building, and maybe it's the less important thing. But on the contrary, the second step is why this thing that I considered that was not important is the most important for the people. No? And then you realize that they're going to have the wedding photograph there. So you start thinking, well, there is something here which is abstract and which represents the distance with the project, which is very interesting. So in the next project, we will take into account that things have to be like this. So it's a process of going back.